Hi, everyone. I'm Ani Anderson, and I am the CEO of Motivation Beyond Measure. I'm super excited that you're here to join me today for this conversation with Heather Newcomb. We're talking about prison reform, and this is, as I'm going to tell you, a topic that I'm not an expert in, Heather is an expert in, but we're here to talk about how somatic coaching can be a really incredible tool in the restoration process. So, Heather, let me give you a little background about Heather here. Heather jointly coordinates employment and career services at Vermont Works for Women with other program staff. So she plays a leading role in Vermont Works for Women programs for incarcerated women, both during incarcerated and during their reentry transition, which is part that I'm really excited about talking to you about, Heather. So she's an advocate for strong communities where all members thrive and advocates for those who lack a voice of their own. Heather recently joined the board of the Women's Justice and Freedom Initiative, a nonprofit that serves incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women in Vermont. Heather's doing some pretty incredible work with that board. So I'm excited to talk, Heather, a little bit about that today. Welcome. I'm so glad that you're here to share with us.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here. And I just want to thank you for allowing this time so that I can talk about the work that I do with incarcerated women in Vermont and how the tools I learned through somatic coaching has just really improved the work that I bring to these women.
I'm always impressed when I meet somebody who's super passionate about their work. And Heather, you're one of those people who it never ceases to amaze me when we have a conversation, how much you love what you do. And we're going to talk a little bit about your personal story. I'm excited to dive into that. But before we do, today's topic is how somatic coaching can be used as in a restorative function with community reentry, specifically after imprisonment. So, like I said, I'm not an expert in prison reform. My background is in occupational therapy. I'm the co-creator of sensation-based motivation coaching. So I'm a coach. My point is with talking about the OT is I've done a lot of restorative, right? Because therapists do a lot of restorative practices. So Heather and I really share the fact that we're fans of restorative practices. And when I met Heather, I was actually really trying to reach out to my local community after I had written my book. And I reached out to a number of different people. I was excited to connect with Vermont Works for Women, as an organization. I got a hold of Heather. And so I drove on over to meet Heather, and we sat down and we had a great conversation about things like how important spirituality is and purpose and meaningful work. And we had a great conversation. So when my partner Brian and I hosted a live event in Burlington, I called Heather up and said, would you like to come? And I think, Heather, one of the things that was, like I was saying, I love meeting people who are passionate about their work. One of the things that I was excited to talk to you more about at that point was how important it is to help people to reach their fullest potential. So that's something I think in the prison system, probably you've had both sides of the fence experience, right? Like you've seen it where the system kind of fails to meet people where they need to be to reach their fullest potential, but also there are times when people can really thrive, right?
Absolutely. I mean, in the prison system, it's set up in a way that, exerts that oppression and control. And so it really doesn't nurture that aspect of purpose and, meaning. So I work a lot with clients because they know they don't want to experience prison anymore, but it's not enough to just have something you're running away from. You have to have a vision that you're running towards. And that's what I utilize somatic coaching, because many of the women can't envision what that life is like. And so we talk about the sensations and what do they want to feel, and then construct a life that will produce those feelings. We use a lot of the natural laws, especially the law of cause and effect. And it really helps them picture and visualize what that life is like for when they get out.
Heather, you said it's not enough to be running away from something. And I think that in a general population, sometimes it can be. I think I understand what you're talking about in terms of prison, but tell me more about that. Why do people need
Well,
more than just running away?
well, a lot of it has to do with patterns and those dysfunctional patterns. And it's not simply enough to just say, I'm going to stop using drugs or I'm going to stay sober. Like we have to, deconstruct those patterns so that we can develop new patterns that are going to produce the effects that we want in our new life that's filled with meaning and purpose.
So you used to be in case management, and I think if I remember correctly, you've moved less to case management and more to coaching, right? And I think you did that before you became part of the sensation-based motivation coaching program, before you learned SBMC. Is that accurate?
Yes, we switched to the coaching framework rather than a case management because I discovered with the case management style, I was doing for my participants. I was bringing resources to the clients to get their needs met. But then if that need arose in the future, they didn't learn the skills to fulfill that need themselves. So by using the coaching framework, all the action is taken by the client. I may direct them in a certain way or make a referral, but the action is theirs. I might support them in taking that action. I might make a phone call with them on speakerphone and provide that emotional support, but the action they take. So when the need comes up in the future, they know how to take care of that need themselves.
Okay, I'd love for you to give us an example of this, Heather, and especially because as I was inviting people to this conversation, I noticed that some organizations in prison reform are still using the case management model, and some are using a coaching model. And so I'd love to have an example of like what it looked like to do a case management versus what it might look like to do coaching with somebody. Kind of something specific.
Sure. I mean, something as specific as, bringing groceries to someone so that they can eat versus showing them how to make a grocery list and where the different items can be found in the market so that they can work their way up to doing the skill independently in the future.
Gotcha. And that's important because I mean, I'm making my own assumptions. I think we can kind of see the dots, but
It's really overwhelming because when you come out of the prison environment, you have zero control. You make zero decisions for yourself. I
okay.
mean, even if you hold a facility job, you don't get to pick and choose your shift because you have to wait for a corrections officer to show up and escort you to do the job. So you don't keep your own schedule. So, simple things like going to the laundromat takes many steps in order to complete it, and helping clients break down big tasks into smaller achievable chunks really helps them understand their abilities, and the increase in confidence is just palpable.
I really understand more about what you're talking about it's not enough just to run away from something from a motivational standpoint, because it takes energy to run away from something. And it sounds like the disempowerment in the system kind of indoctrinates us to be so disempowered that we actually wouldn't even have enough energy to run away. Does that sound accurate?
It's completely accurate. Many of the women already have experienced trauma before getting to the incarceral system.
Right.
And that, incarceration just perpetuates that trauma. So it's not a healing environment at all. And so for providers that come in from the outside that bring healing programming and healing aspects to the women, they just really latch on and they really are open to that because it's something that's, they don't receive in there anywhere else.
That's fascinating that they're really latching on to the healing elements. So I have a question for you. I'd love it if you shared a little bit about your own personal story with us, please, Heather, because you have some experience with this. And before Heather and I got on the call, we were commenting about how there are so many stories that need to be told or that are being told about people who were incarcerated or had issues of all kinds of things. things like, Heather's story, where they've moved to really empowered positions in their lives and are making tremendous progress in our communities. So if you could share a little bit about your own experience through your personal story, I'd really appreciate that.
Sure. I'm an addict in recovery. I've been in recovery 18 years. And when I was in active addiction, I did commit harms on community to support my habit. And I am very familiar with police. Fortunately, I think because I was raised middle class and the way the systems is, I was also afforded court diversion and other treatments so that I don't have the consequences of a long-term record that many folks have to bear with. But I certainly have experienced those oppressive situations. And because of my middle class upbringing, I knew what I was working towards to get back to that stability, that financial stability. But I also, remember what it was like to be on public assistance, having gotten custody of my son back and finding work, being offered a raise, and then actually lost more in benefits than that raise put in my pocket. So how defeated I felt. And I knew what I was working to get back towards. So I just had this drive. How are those folks from generational poverty or have, multiple generations of dealing with incarceration or that oppression? How do they overcome those obstacles without those role models or those advocates that can really show them the path and show them that they have the skills, and not only that they are deserving of it?
That's a big deal, right? That you're deserving of it.
I think that's what really brought me to sensation-based motivational coaching for me personally, because I always struggled with self-esteem because of, my personal relationship with my mother and feelings of unworthiness. And I wanted to resolve those feelings so I could have a strong, healthy relationship with my mother. And I was really able to identify patterns that I developed as a 12-year-old girl, hearing my mother's criticisms and deconstructing those patterns so that, now when my mother criticizes me, I'm like, oh, that's just mom's pattern. And it doesn't impact me so emotionally anymore.
Yeah, which is giant. I think you bring up a really good point about the people who are working with people doing their own work and unraveling their own trauma. Has that been an important part for you? Do you feel like you're a better facilitator, a better coach because of some of the personal work you've done like that?
Absolutely. And when I'm working with someone new for the first time, I always start by sharing my story so that they understand that, they can also get to a place where they will be able to tell their story with confidence and empowerment and see our mistakes as strengths and wisdom. I always say, turn your wounds into wisdom. Bring purpose to your pain.
Yeah, that's great. I remember when I first met you, you weren't on the board yet, the Women's Justice Freedom Initiative. And you were in a position where you could have been advocating for further reform in the Vermont system, but perhaps you didn't feel worthy yourself. But at this point, it feels like you're really just going for it as big as you can possibly go for it. I mean, you used to be concerned about sharing your own story, right?
Yeah, I was really concerned with sharing my story because, not many people who are in the correction system, because they've been molded with that oppression and power dynamic, see someone with a past like mine, they might not think that I'm a different person than I am today, like a cat can't change its spots or something like that. But sure, we can. I think we're dynamic beings. And, that's one of the things I learned with sensation-based motivational coaching is that when we change those patterns, when we change those frequencies, we are different people.
Right.
and we, have different sensations. We have different thoughts now, which leads to different behaviors and different actions, which produce different results.
Absolutely, absolutely. So really changing it from the baseline. So let's talk about somatic coaching a little bit here. I'm not sure how familiar those who are watching are with somatic coaching. It's kind of an up and coming thing. I think it's getting more press now because so many people are stressed and more people are recognizing that somatic coaching has real value in all kinds of areas. It used to be just something that therapist would do from a therapeutic somatic therapy point of view, but now coaches are using it as well, and other people, leaders and managers and things like that, and consultants. So I have a question for you that I'm going to ask, and then I want to talk a little bit about why I'm asking it. Okay. So the question is, I want you to paint a picture for us of what incarcerated individuals are dealing with in terms of how they feel when they're sentenced in prison and when they're trying to re-enter the community. So kind of three different phases. And I'm asking the question so that those who aren't familiar with the system can get a better idea. I remember talking to you some of the first times we spoke about it, and it's just really incredible to have an awareness of something that I'm not around all the time. And I think we really need to bring awareness to these things and what people are dealing with, first of all. But the reason I'm asking about the feelings is because I'm not sure that we're asking enough as a society about people's feelings. I think not just in this system, but in our healthcare system, in our education system, in our systems, right? We're not concerned enough about human beings as people, as humans. And human beings have hearts that feel. It's not just that we're brains that are thinking and all of the if the things that we do come from the cortex. No, no, no. Our hearts, our guts, our bodies are important. And from a somatic coaching standpoint, we're looking at all of those things because somatic means soma. So we're looking at the body as if the body has inherent wisdom. What if that were true? So give us a picture of what it looks like in those stages, Heather, so that we can have a further conversation about some of the possibilities.
Sure. I mean, spreading awareness is key because I know before I started working at the correctional facility, I was under the assumption that as taxpayers, my money goes to, programming that's restorative, and that people who are sentenced to incarceration get rehabilitated and they're brought resources to support that reentry transition. And then I discovered how really inaccessible some of those programs and resources are because there's lots of different classifications. So I work with women from the moment they are detained, which is pre-trial. And I have a woman who, has been detained over 3 years, and she doesn't even have a trial scheduled because of the pandemic right now.
Oh my gosh.
And so we use a lot of somatic coaching because she has frustration over, not being able to control. And meanwhile, her family is still living, time is going on. Yeah. And how does she feel purposeful? And she feels purposeful because she does have a passion to make the system better. And so she has joined the facility advisory group and, wants to make that contribution so that even though if she is released, that she knows she's leaving this facility better for the next residents than she came into it being. And then once people are sentenced and they know when they're going to be released, it's really working on that release plan and what type of life do they want to create, and how can we align actions today that will support that vision when their sentence is up and they're going through the reentry transition. So are there some training programs that they can access while they're incarcerated? There are a lot of different certifications that they can get that are industry recognized, such as construction training, occupational safety and hazard, OSHA 10 certification, ServSafe. There is a pilot that is being developed right now between the University in Vermont and Cabot Cheese for some farming certifications through the UVM extension program. So bringing some resources so that they have the skills and abilities to create that vision of reentry and give them the tools to be successful.
That's awesome. So I have two questions. The first one is about reintegration into the community and why that doesn't work. But before I ask that, I'm saying it so I don't forget. Before I ask that, I want to know when does somatic coaching fail with these people? Do you find that there's a certain person or a certain situation in which you try to bring up that wisdom in the body and it's just not working with them?
I mean, for many people, going internal into the body is a scary place for them, especially when they've experienced severe abuse or sexual molestation or trauma. That is really scary for them and takes some really specialized treatment. And one thing that somatic coaching does is, even though those pieces are present in the body, we can also nurture that core motivation, that core expression piece. Because even though those core wounds still exist, there is that core expression that is still in there. And we can use somatic coaching to nurture that core expression so that hopefully we can grow that core expression to be bigger than the core wounds until that therapy can be, secured to do that healing piece.
Gotcha. So it sounds like you're able to really help people focus on the potential more than the wounding, if possible, or even working them up to the place where they can focus more on potential.
Absolutely. Especially once I know that's a piece of their story, I will do some, teaching of those natural laws so that they know that even though they don't feel those places, they're still existent in there. And we can nurture them, and we can use strategies like Qigong or Tai Chi. Booty yoga is another one to help align those physiological patterns that our bodies carry.
Right. So that was something I wanted to ask you about, why people come back to prison. Do you think it's because of patterns? Is that what you think it is because of?
Absolutely. I think it's because of patterns. And I think that's one of the major reasons why the traditional form of reentry hasn't worked, because when someone is released, they're released on conditions that says, don't drink or do drugs, don't go near these people, don't be out of place during these curfews. It's all these don'ts, but it's nothing about what do I do then? And if they haven't really had that time to develop how to do pro-social activities and what things make me feel positive,
right,
then they're going to fall back into their comfort patterns, because at least they know what the results are from those patterns.
Right, absolutely. Even if they're uncomfortable, even if they're painful, even if they're obviously not working.
Exactly.
So go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, I think sometimes, with traditional, reentry or traditional probation and parole, is they try to get them to think their way out of patterns. And that's not going to work, because we carry patterns in our bodies.
That's what I was going to say too. I mean, you're talking about, what happens when I go back to the community and I've got all these don'ts, and I'm just imagining for myself how that would feel, how would that actually feel in the body? And so, we need to remember that our emotional life really is two things. It's the thoughts we think, and it's the sensations that we feel. And if we're just going from how we think, we're going to butt up against all the patterning, but we're not really dealing with how somebody feels in their body, right? We're not actually dealing with the sensations. Actually, one of the things I think is fascinating about working with the sensations, Heather, is that you can actually create behavior change without getting all wrapped up in the stories that we tell ourselves, Right, you're doing some fascinating work. Actually, I'd love for you to share an example of how you're using some somatic coaching. Remember that cross mapping story you told me?
Absolutely.
I'd
I
really love
mean,
for you to share some of that, because I think that one of the things that's really interesting about that is there are situations in which we don't talk to people about how they feel, and it makes sense that we don't, because we're going to be entering into like rabbit hole situations or getting ourselves involved with things that are therapy, not coaching, or we're going to just get ourselves involved in some really, really deep stuff. And there's a lot we can do with people who have experienced trauma without doing therapy, and I think your experience using cross mapping, that the story that you're going to tell is a really good example of how we can do some potentially like edgy stuff in a way that is almost I don't want to use the word more comfortable, it's not as activating,
it's
perhaps.
not it's not as activating. And then I think also it doesn't create those pathways for them to recreate it themselves later. Like by having growing, so cross mapping is a tool that we use that recognizes those undesired sensations. I often use like a lump in my throat or something like that, an undesired. And once you understand that you can direct pathways and you can control the intensity of sensations, then you also know from the law of polarity that if you're feeling that undesirable feeling, that somewhere there must be a desired feeling. And identifying what that desired feeling is, locating that in your body, and then you can direct your energy towards growing the desired energy. And there's so much power when you're able to hold both sensations. Like that, talk about building confidence. I felt so empowered when first time I was able to like really hold both sensations, because then I was like, it's my choice. I can choose what sensation I want to direct my energy towards.
Yeah.
And that is just such a huge awareness. And I mean, especially in something like in a correctional setting where you aren't given a whole lot of choice, you can choose how you respond to the environment. And you can choose to say, oh, DOC's making me do this, DOC's making me do that. Or you can choose to feed the energy, what if I did this? What if I did that? Oftentimes when I'm working with participants, they can't see the possibilities. And I use that visual led release tool for us to develop what that vision would be like if you could.
Heather, I'm listening to you and I've walked the path with you and I'm still listening, and I'm like mind blowing about some of the ways in which you're approaching the work. And, I haven't been in a number of facilities. I don't know how other people are doing it, but I would assume this is a really cutting edge way to approach the incarceration system, and one in which where people would really thrive. I want to back up for a second and talk about the universal laws or the natural laws, because you brought them up a number of times and I'm not sure if people know what they are. I'm trying to be really succinct about it. Whether you come from a scientific or a spiritual background, there are ways in which nature works. And so we like to come from nature instead of making it spiritual, which can often, lead down certain lineages, and instead of making it really scientific, also it's important to know some of the science, like how your body works and things, but instead of making it really scientific, because that can make it kind of inaccessible for people. Nature is a great way to talk about just how nature works, that actually taps into spiritual universal principles and scientific principles in a really easy way. And so SBMC is the tools in SBMC help people to embrace natural laws. So I'll give you an example. Heather was talking about the natural law of polarity. Well, there's night and there's day. there's up and there's down. There's always two sides. And so oftentimes we forget about that and we think about just one side or another side. We think it's always nighttime or it's always daytime, but it's not in nature. It's both. And so what Heather was talking about in terms of one of the tools that we use, cross mapping, when we just the awareness, Heather, like you said, of helping somebody when they feel a certain way in their body, their sensations feel a certain way. I feel constricted in my chest, for example. And we have them call up, well, where in your body might you feel expansion? All of a sudden they realize maybe for the first time they have choice. And especially in an environment where they don't have a lot of choice, it can be really powerful. So I just wanted to give a little bit of that background. You told me a story of when you used cross mapping. I think it was between two people, victim and perpetrator kind of idea. Would you tell us a little bit about that? I thought that was really fascinating.
Yeah, it was in a restorative circle where the two roommates weren't really getting along, and it was resulting for them to have discipline reports. Okay. And they were getting consequences, and one interaction had gotten so severe that one of them had ended up in segregation. So I wanted to work with them so that they could understand that, you know, neither one of them was right and neither one of them was wrong. Like right and wrong is a concept of humans, but in nature that doesn't exist. And so where could we find alignment between the two of them to build off of something? And so I used cross mapping so that they could identify what, you know, was causing the disagreements or the conflict, so that we could identify the opposite criteria, so that we could build on something that wasn't going to be so conflictive. And so we built on, you know, that we found out they were both nurturers is what we settled on. And we really developed, you know, how could they nurture each other rather than antagonizing each other? And that way they could, if they stayed in that mindset of nurturing, then they wouldn't then have those thoughts creating behaviors and actions, which resulted in the DRs, because they were coming from that place of nurturing rather than that place of conflict and antagonizing each other.
That worked?
It works because, I mean, when you get the alignment of community in such a place as a correctional facility, there has never been a time that I have felt in harm's way when I'm in there. Yeah. I have, you know, when I'm there, women are so appreciative of time they get to spend with me, and the fact that I go there, and it's not just me, it's anybody who comes in from the outside. Sure. That just, you know, exhibits that worth and reminds them that, you know, no matter what experience they're experiencing from the facility itself, there are still people that are finding them worthy. And there are still people that see them as humans, and still people that see them as whole. So many times the systems told them they're broken, teachers have told them they're broken, parents have told them they're broken, and to just remind them, sorry, broken doesn't exist in nature. We're all whole. I remember when Brian was teaching us and he ripped the paper in half and he's like, there's still a top, a bottom, a left, a right. It's still a whole piece of paper. And I took that because, you know, our wounds don't make us who we are, because we have that other side, the polarity of that core expression.
That's so good, Heather. I got to ask you, what do you think is going to change the system? Because you know just as well as all of us do, red tape and, you know, all the rule makers and waiting for the government to change or whatever. I mean, maybe that is the answer. What do you think? Because you've seen so much growth. I was talking to you just a few weeks ago, and you were telling me some of the things that the Vermont prison system is going to be instituting. One of the things I remember you said was curtains.
In the restorative unit, yes. Yeah. Our superintendent, Teresa Messier, she really is a big supporter of restorative practices. and she wants to turn one whole unit of the facility into a restorative unit, and we are going to decorate it like home. I just adopted a new space that it was painted gray, and I painted it purple and natural linen so that we have this pop of color, and it just does not feel like a prison whatsoever. So that when women come into that space, they don't feel like they're in prison. They understand like the work we're going to do in there is purposeful work, and it's work that's aligned with, their divine purpose. I do a lot of work with that soul's agenda, which is a tool that we learned in SBMC to help someone discover that core expression. Because ever since learning my soul's agenda, like it just helps with my decision making. My core word is worthiness. And if I have a choice to make, I think about what one's going to bring me closer to worthiness. And then I know that as long as I'm in alignment with worthiness, that's the path I'm supposed to take.
So how are we going to change this, Heather? How is reform really going to take hold to create systemic changes?
I mean, I think that's why I really joined the board of the Women's Justice and Freedom Initiative, because when I first started doing this work, I thought the system was broken. And I stopped saying that. I thought we needed criminal justice reform, but I discovered the way it's set up is to be, about power and control and that oppression, that there's no way that someone can come out of that in a restored way. So now I consider myself more of a prison abolitionist, because I really think community justice is where it's at. If we can handle harm, and first of all, I think we have to look at crime on the spectrum of harm, so that those who have not committed crimes can have that understanding. And I think when we use a concept like harm, that's more universal. And so that we can have that compassion and empathy towards someone who commits harm against community. And how can we as community collectively support this person so they don't feel that their only option is to commit harms?
Yeah, that's amazing, Heather. If you're here with us live, please do not leave. I want to tell folks who are watching the recording later how they can get a hold of Heather, and then we're going to stop the recording and we're going to have a conversation. But before we do that, the places that you can get a hold of Heather are at Vermont Works for Women, which is vtworksforwomen.org. And the Women's Justice and Freedom Initiative is at wjfi.org. I'm 42, and my partner just turned 50, and he's like, my eyes, I have to get the glasses. And I'm to the point where I'm denying the fact that the glasses are coming for me too. It's wjfi.org. Heather, what is a great way to get a hold of you if somebody is interested in talking to you more about your work?
Sure. I put my email in the chat. It's Newcomb. So it's HNEWCOMB as in boy at vtworksforwomen.org.
Thank you. Thanks. And before we stop the recording, I just want to thank everybody who has been with us live and watching the recording. And one of the things that Heather really said that stuck with me that I'm going to take from this conversation is to stop saying the system's broken. That was really huge for me, Heather. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation today. If you're here live, please don't go away. And Heather, thanks.
Yes, thank you so much for helping me share this awareness.
It's important work.
Thank you.